Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, two scholars explore basic conceptions and misconceptions about Islam, fundamentalism, and terrorism. And we've got a photo essay on people's response across the globe to the attacks of September 11th. Montgomery County schools. Dan Keating of the Washington Post reports that a growing income gap among students means a growing performance gap as well. Tuberculosis screening. Public health official Dr. Thomas Walsh warns it's being overdone, and that's not only a hassle and a waste. He says it's a danger. We've got the jazz and Brazilian sounds of singer-songwriter and whammy honoree Leah, and poetry by Laurie Tsang with Antonio Parker on sax and Leland Nakamura on drums.
Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. We are on top, from the Amazon jungles to the slums of Gaza, from Soweto to Ho Chi Minh City. Everyone knows America, or they know the Hollywood and CNN pictures of us. They know our music, our movies and TV, our fast food, and our military might. But we Americans are famously ignorant about other cultures and how they view us. Come on, really, I mean, who even knows what the capital of Canada is? Truth be told, we don't really much care about the rest of the world, or we didn't until the shocking agony of September 11th. We need to know more about Islam, and that's why I've invited two leading Islamic scholars to the Coffee House. Zahid Bukhari is director of the Pew Project, MAPS, Muslims in the American Public Square, and a fellow at the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding at Georgetown University. Dr. Bukhari was founding executive director of the Pakistan Institute of Public Opinion. He's written extensively on Islam and development, and he's been very active in American Islamic affairs since coming to the United States. Professor Ahmed Moen is a leader of the Ethiopian-American Islamic community. He's a doctor of public health and a faculty member at Howard University and an authority on multicultural relations. Welcome both of you to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
When I think of the term terrorism, it's kind of an oily concept. A lot of very unresponsive, undemocratic governments will sometimes call people terrorists who were involved in rebellion in order basically to characterize their behavior as out of bounds. Yet the attack on September 11th, I think by any definition, was terrorism. And people are wondering, most of the analysis, the comments say that this was motivated by Islam, that these are quote-unquote Islamic terrorists. And people are wondering, well, if that's true, if it was motivated by Islamic fervor, what is it in Islam that would lead people to do this? We can't say for sure that who the people were who did this. We can't say why they did it. But when you hear that this is motivated by Islamic fervor, what's your response, Dr. Bukhari?
No, I think we should make a distinction that it's fervor of Islam, or it's a kind of very deviation of some ideology, and also against whom, why. So I think universally it is also accepted, and it is first of all, this incident was condemned by all Islamic circles, Muslims in North America and USA and Canada, Muslims all over the world, all governments, all Islamic movements. I think all scholars, all sort of scholars, they have condemned this atrocity, that this is not Islam, this is not Islamic, and this is absolutely against the teaching of the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So for that reason, it is any claim that this is Islamic or this is any Islamic for due to Islam it happened, it's not correct to label in that way. Then the next question could be that okay, there are Muslims' names and some Arabic letters, Arabic text, some fatwas, all sort of those things are there. Then again, I think all scholars and the leaders, they have pointed out that this is, if somebody is using that, so he is using Islam, if somebody is maintaining that word. And I think President Bush said it very categorically, that these people, they have not only hijacked the aeroplane, they have hijacked the Islam. So I think in that way we should maintain definitely that first of all it's not Islamic, and whoever is using that is using absolutely wrong way the concept of and the ideology of Islam.
Is it really more political than religious in that Osama bin Laden was said to believe that the United States had no basis to be in Saudi Arabia. That was one issue. That the bombing of Iraq, the embargo against Iraq conducted by the United States were motivating factors in issuing essentially a declaration of war against the United States, and the U.S. support for the Israeli occupation of Jerusalem. Is what's going on here really more political than religious, Dr. Moen?
First of all, thank you for inviting us to give some explanation for the events that has taken place on September 11 and its ramification for us here as Muslim Americans and people who have benefited from our migration to this country and freedom. And we have to appreciate the fact that Islam is a new religion for few Americans, not all Americans. The way they know Islam is through missionary writings. They also know Islam through historians, and some of the learning centers that introduced Islam was through educational process that is not totally written by Muslims. Number two is my concern right now is that the media has also something to do with it. For example, there is fundamentalism or fundamentalist. Then you have political Islam. Then they have Muslim extremists. You have a definition for all of it centered around the word Islam. But it describes the behavior of the Muslims. But the behavior of a Muslim is generally different, because I know all religions are named, most of them, if not all, after their founder. Buddhist after Buddha, Christians after Christ, Judaism after Judah. But Islam is not named after Muhammad. It's named after the behavior of the Muslim, which is submission totally to God. So the concept of being peaceful and in command of your own self and behavior is very Islamic. To go on the extreme sides and practice terrorism, as it is my definition of terrorism, is meaning civilians who are not engaged in a battle or who are not involved in a direct confrontation to subdue Muslims. In this case, there is no confrontation, and the attack on the in New York was unjustified, because life is highly sanctified in Islam. You can't take a life without a just cause.
Let me ask you about Muhammad in history. He was born around 570 in the Christian era. At the age of 40, he had revelations when he was in Mecca that led to the Quranic verses. He spent the next 10 years in Mecca, and then he moved to Medina on the invitation, I understand, of Jewish merchants in Medina. And it was in Medina that, after a period of time, he led his followers into 3 battles. The third battle culminated in a treaty that gave the right of Medina residents to go on Hajj to Mecca. I understand, I don't know if this is true or not, correct me if I'm wrong, that there in the Quran, the verses from Mecca and the verses from Medina are very distinct. And that the verses from Mecca are a plea for tolerance. The verses from Medina are a plea for a war against the infidels. Is that a correct interpretation of the distinction of the period in Mecca and Medina? And how do you reconcile that?
No, I don't think so. That's the correct the labeling of these two periods. You are right. I think in Mecca and Medina there is a difference. Both are revelation from Allah, from God. Mecca, there's a persecution is going on. So over there are very direct chapters. They were revealed. What was said? It was said that about the unity of God, about the day after, and the prophethood of Muhammad. All these three basic concepts was said again and again, that look at around yourself and you will find that there is all these signs are there.
And that there should be no compulsion in religion.
And no compulsion for religion. Number two, when they went to Medina, they were establishing an Islamic State. Over there, all those instructions were already there. It is not the case that you are in Medina, no, the Makkah instructions are cancelled. No way. However, over there also, when you have Islamic State, you have a family and you have a community, it was ordered that if somebody attacks you, you have to defend. So it's not that you go there and then fight everybody. No, it is definitely the whole concept of jihad. First of all, it's not the translation of holy war is absolutely wrong.
It's a defensive struggle.
It's basically if you are attacked as a person, as a family, as a tribe, as a country, as a nation, as a people, you have to defend. This is your right. So that right was stated again and again. So that's the difference. I think to some extent there are all some other debates are also there, but that's the basic rights over there. And if you allow me, I like to. I think you stated before about the anger or about certain policy of America in Middle East and in Muslim world. Those people, if they did it on that name, they did it absolutely wrong thing. But it doesn't mean that those wrong things are not there committed by American foreign policy. I wish and I hope that after this incident, the whole terrible incident, at least there will be a discussion, maybe after some period, there will be a discussion among the scholars and among policymakers why a big chunk of Muslim population or the world population, they are angry with the American policies. I think you mentioned 3 points. I think the American armies in Saudi Arabia, and because these are sacred homeland, it's sacred area for the Muslims. Sanction against Iraq, and not only Muslim, I think in American you will find several people, those who are opposing those sanctions, and an American uncritical support of Israel, or the making that issue as a domestic issue. That's really the problem. I think we should face that. I'm from Pakistan. Another point, let me tell you about that. In 1980s, America was supporting Afghanistan. And all these people, including Osama bin Laden, he was freedom fighter. He was very wonderful, good guy at that time when they were fighting against the Soviet Union. In 1990s, America just left that place, and the civil war was going on. America, the national interest changed, and now all these freedom fighters, now they are terrorists. So I think it's this change of policy here on the name of national interest. Over there, it looks like a betrayal. So that we should also think about. It's not that I think that's both things should happen. Muslim, I think the leaders and the organizations and all those, they should also think about that the anger, how to resolve those anger.
That's an important point,
yeah.
And we're running out of time, and so I think give you a chance to correct whatever other briefly misconceptions you see that Americans have about Islam.
First of all, Islam has its first contact and legitimization by its contact in Ethiopia with a Christian king, in the sense that Islam has been friendly to Christians, and the king of Ethiopia at the time offered even asylum to the Muslims who came out there seeking refuge. So the concept that Islam is antagonistic to Christianity is wrong. And in fact, it says those who are the people of the book, meaning Christians, are more compassionate towards your religion. that one misconception that it's not a confrontation.
I'm going to have to wrap you up, I'm sorry. But it applies as well. The people of the book include the Jews. I'm a Jew,
Yes.
and there is a sense, especially during the darkest ages of Europe, in the Middle Ages,
Spain.
that it was the Ottoman Empire that was really the most tolerant, and it was a Muslim empire that was the most tolerant toward non-Muslim, non-majority peoples.
More than that, I think in Spain also.
In Spain also.
It's a golden age of.
Absolutely.
I was going to mention that to you.
But I need to thank Doctors
okay.
Bukhari and Moen for helping us better understand the world of Islam. We do need to know more, and I don't mean just better intelligence about terrorism. We need to know more because our ways aren't the only ways, and our ways may not even always be the best ways. And by the way, the capital of Canada is Ottawa. Still ahead, poetry by Laurie Tsang, the growing performance gap between affluent and poor students in Montgomery County, acclaimed singer-songwriter Leah, and are we dangerously over-testing kids for tuberculosis?
My life goes on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the
girl centered in the upper part of the frame. The photograph is torn and faded, yet they demand your attention, lined up like stair steps, straight as soldiers, regal as princesses. The eldest, proud and impassive. The middle one, thoughtful and inquisitive. The littlest, the artist's mother, a hint of defiance held firmly in the stubborn set of her mouth. Sepia-toned arms and knees peek out from crisp white cotton. Willful waves of hair are disciplined by supple fabric bows. Their features bear witness to history, maintain the integrity of their ancestry, African, Chinese, Jamaican. Savor this moment, captured in the blink of a mind's eye, an offering, frozen in time like the totems framing the photograph. The sun-bleached skull bone of some small beast, tiny doll-like figures gleaming like ebony, spotted feathers soft as a sigh, cowries with dark slotted mouths closing protectively around hidden mysteries. The tight, dry bud of a rose, still unopened, the light reflecting white off the tiny thorns adorning its brittle, delicate stem. Fallen petals the color of dried blood, crystal droplets glistening on the glossy cheeks of dead leaves, raindrops or tears. A knife and fork stand guard on the right, the engraved silver dark and tarnished, the ivory handles cracked and yellowing with age. They are not weapons, but a reminder this is our heritage, a ritual meal, a feast for the spirit. The light weaves its way in and out of the shadows, drawing the rough texture of burlap out of the shadows, the coarse strands of our past and separate journeys woven loosely into the fabric of a nation's destiny. A tablecloth draped over an altar. Worship here. Feast on this. Nourish yourself on this ancestral dialogue and replenish your soul. Worship here. Feast on this. Nourish yourself on this ancestral dialogue and replenish your soul.
Hi, and welcome to a second look at the Coffee House. Montgomery County, famous for its fine schools and a vaunted liberalism, has a dilemma. In affluent areas, Montgomery students still score well on their SATs, still go on to top-flight universities. But only a mile or two away, children from pockets of suburban poverty are failing to learn even the basic 3 R's. The educational gap between the haves and the have-nots is big and getting bigger. An obvious case for reform, except that many people at the top end of the scale like things just the way they are. So what to do? Dan Keating and Brigid Schulte are co-authors of a two-part series in the Washington Post titled A Growing Divide on Reading Scores and Income in Montgomery County. And they're here with us to discuss it. Welcome, Brigid. Welcome, Dan, to the Coffee House. Well, let's set the basics situation here. Up is the middle of Montgomery County, which is basically a big square on a map. In fact, we have a map here. People have settled. People from who have a harder time making ends meet have settled down the middle of the county, and now they have children, they're attending schools, which means what? Dan?
Well, it means as the school district has changed from an almost a district with almost no poverty in the schools of maybe 25 years ago. Now it is a district that has a core that has a very wide gap. The thing is, as the county overall has had increasing poverty, it hasn't been evenly distributed across the county. What's happened is there's been a much widening gap between the still affluent schools and now the schools with relatively high concentrations of poverty. And that's had a very big impact on school performance.
And economic segregation, so that kids from affluence attend schools separate from kids from the other end of the spectrum.
Well, I think one of the things that our series did that I thought was an important thing to do, when you look at large suburban systems like Montgomery County or Fairfax, there are a number of schools across the country. You think of the suburbs as this sort of grand place that everyone went. There's two-car garages, the lawns are neatly manicured, and everybody's happy and middle class, and frankly, everybody's white. And that was sort of the view of the suburbs in the 1950s. And I think what our series did, and you put the map up, you can see that the suburbs are really in a place right now, this is what Superintendent Jerry Wiest has said, where 30 years ago the inner cities were. There's a growing diversity racially, ethnically, culturally, and certainly economically. And what Dan and I found in Dan's analysis and the reporting that I did is that is having huge impacts on the schools.
So compare students from the two types of schools.
Well, the analysis that we did using actual, usually when people talk about test scores, they talk about school aggregate numbers. And the problem with that is that you have all different kinds of kids fitting in that school. So when you have a school aggregate number, you can't actually say that that tells you anything about how an individual student performed. So when you say schools with higher poverty levels have, say, lower average scores, which is a widely known finding, you don't know if that's saying that a student at a school with high poverty will score worse, or just a higher group of having more poor kids will lead to a lower score. So what we have was scores for individual students and that student's socioeconomic background. So then we know the poverty level of a school. So what we did is essentially take a better off kid at a low poverty concentration school all the way up to a high poverty concentration school, did the same with a middle class kid, same with a poverty kid. And what we were able to show was that the kids of different economic backgrounds had different performance, fell in a different performance, but also what level of poverty concentration you had a huge impact on a kid.
But a poverty kid attending a school among kids of affluence did well.
Did absolutely fantastic. Essentially, test scores to try to raise, efforts to try to raise the test scores of poor kids have been tried for a long time now with very little success. They pour a lot of extra money in. There's all kinds of different programs. They'll point at a school here or a school there that does well, but overall, despite all the extra money being poured in, it's very hard to raise the test scores. But you take those kids from that same background and you put them in a relatively affluent school where there's no special programs for them, no extra funding, none of the things aimed at them, and their test scores come up by a huge amount. An amount that if you could devise a program that would raise any kid's score that much, it would be the national,
Right.
Let me tell you about two stories, and just very briefly, that really struck me when we're talking about how kids fare in their different environments. One poor child, I hesitate to call him that, he qualified for what's considered a free and reduced meal, a federal lunch subsidy, which is what we used as our definition of poverty, and then a high poverty school being if there are 40% of kids who qualify for that lunch program. There was a delightful young boy named Gotti, and he went to Greenwood Elementary School, which is an affluent school. And I spent some time following him around. And I think the thing that struck me the most is that no one knew he was poor. And when I spoke with the teachers about him, and he'd started off having a lot of troubles, wasn't really doing well, couldn't focus, the teacher said, we didn't know he was poor, so we have absolutely no different, we don't have any different expectations for him. And so
Yeah, he was expected to do just as much homework. He was in a classroom where everybody did extra credit and got straight A's, and it was a very powerful impact on him.
Well, I remember reading, as you said, there was Mozart on the PA in the morning at a particular school. I mean, the cultural influence of a school like that is pretty powerful.
It was Schubert, actually.
Schubert.
No, it was at Burning Tree, which is in an affluent area, considered an excellent school. Kids do great on the test scores there. And you spend a day there, and several things strike you, from the Schubert in the morning to third graders were learning rudimentary algebra. The teacher was saying, now, when you guys get ready to go to college, you can say you learned algebra in third grade, and the kids were already saying where they were going to go to college, compared to across the county in some areas where there are higher concentrations of poor kids. Many of them recently arrived immigrants, a lot of them struggling with language, a lot of them with parents who work. There was one child who, for his New Year's resolution, he wanted to make sure he got to school because his parents left at 5 in the morning and sometimes to go to work, and sometimes he slept through his alarm. So yes, you've got very, very different sort of environments or experiences.
So an obvious solution, or one part of the solution, would be to take kids out of that working poverty environment and put them in with Schubert, except that there's a high resistance to doing that.
Right. I mean, basically, one of the findings that we tried to emphasize, or what the analysis showed, is that everybody knows that busing has left a pretty bad taste in this country, not only with communities that originally resisted it, but in fact, minority communities are pretty resistant to busing these days. Mm-hmm. They felt it broke up neighborhoods and a lot of things like that. So while the country, I think, had a fairly bad experience with busing, and that has taken the issue of segregation, of school segregation, out of the front line for the most part. What we were trying to show is that economic segregation, though, regardless of racial segregation, the issue of economic segregation shouldn't be forgotten as a serious impact in what happens with schools. In other words, if you have a high concentration of poverty, you can pour a lot of extra money in there, you're really not going to be able to lift these test scores for the poor kids. So we were trying to emphasize the issue that you have to keep an eye on economic integration now. Does that mean that I think it's likely we're going to go back to busing anytime soon, forced busing? No. But on the other hand, there are some creative efforts at trying to do give people a choice that will lead to having better integration in the schools.
You could redraw the boundaries, as I understand, to create some integration, economic integration. I mean, that would be one of the more political hot-button subjects, and it was interesting that we wrote about that, and that schools with really high test scores have areas where the property sells for more for that very reason. And after our story ran, a letter to the editor came to the Washington Post that we published from someone saying, I paid $150,000 more to be in this school district, and if you tried moving, it's like, well, that's exactly what we were talking about, is that this is the kind of resistance you would see if you tried to do that.
So then that begs the question, so what do you do? Do you have reverse magnets? Would there be resistance to that? Redraw boundaries? Do you try to have some kind of busing? Those are, those are
regional solutions. Those are Northwest Consortium.
Well, some of those are really radical,
but
there are some
on the table and are
more moderate, I guess, if you will, more palatable, if you will, are the Northeast Consortium, where they took.
You get to choose which school you go to.
And they drew the boundaries that would encompass rich and poor areas, and then each school has a special focus, and then students choose from that. And the jury's still out. It's still a fairly new program, but there are across the country sort of small examples of creative solutions, if you will, to try to deal with this.
Right. I mean, so we're taking small steps, and you've raised what amounts to a problem that needs bigger steps, but I guess we'll see. Thank you. Thanks to Dan Keating and Brigid Schulte of the Washington Post for taking the time to talk about separate and unequal schools in Montgomery County. Yes, it's human nature to want the best for your own children, but to do so at the expense of other children creates a problem. It's a problem that won't go away. It must be solved. I'm Howard Cohen, and this has been A Second Look.
It sure looked good, but you done make me one thing that ain't just as it should be. It seems every inclination of our hearts is on evil all the time. Say worse, well it sure looked good. To me, and it was sweet as it could be. It seems her determination was to whip out this evil on my mind. Here I am, a little part of creation, one mother's child born free and wild in this great nation. Here's my creed, I will be all that I can be in this place and this time. Bless you, son, and knock on wood. And may the force be with you as much as any force can be. And my newest inspiration is the world's greatest rebel against time. He was here since the dawn of creation. One mother's child, a sacrifice for our salvation. Here's his message, here's his creed. You can be all that you can be in this place.
Welcome, Leah, to the musical tradition segment of the Coffee House.
Thank you.
Now, that wasn't your typical three-chord folk song, was it?
Not exactly.
Holy moly, what was that called?
Creation.
Hey, I got your water here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Creation. Now, let's see. Why does that sound familiar to me? I know. We got to do this. Album of the same name.
That's right. My debut CD.
And that's doing real well.
I'm glad to hear
Yes,
it. I'm glad to see it, right.
Now, you were nominated for a Whammy Award.
Yes, actually, before the CD came out for Best New Artist, and then last year for Female Vocal Folk. So go up there with some really cool people, so it was nice.
We're talking about the Washington Area Music Association Awards. That's kind of neat. How long did it take you to make Creation?
3 years.
Wow.
I started out with inadequate funds anyway. I knew exactly what I wanted, thought I would go in and do it in a week. Didn't have the money, and a really incredible guy, Jeff Gruber at Blue House Studios, gotta plug Jeff. He's awesome. Really helped me out a lot with the CD, but it still took time and energy.
Because I remember there was about a year there where everybody saying, when are you coming out with an album? When are you coming out with an album?
And finally I have it.
Great. How about another song, but tell us about it first.
Okay, this next song is called Temporary Blue. And it's for my sweetheart, but it was kind of one of those times where I wasn't feeling so sweet.
Yep, that happens, but you got a good song out of it.
Right, I like it.
Okay. I'll take your water.
Thanks
Take
again.
us home. Thanks.
Kansas City or Maine, Madagascar or Spain. I'm going where blue skies prevail, or at least some blue that I can see. Madagascar blue, slowly going insane. Two parts wisdom for pain. I'm blowing this tired old place. Got a lot of love, but none to waste. Tired of being blue for you. I'm tired of crying my eyes out for love. Tired of wasting time on love. Resolution to be okay. Say Happy New Year all day. Things were going so good for a while. Thought I'd trade my blues in for a smile. Call them temporary blues. Brand new vision, still no sun. Pick a purpose, everyone. I start snowing to keep back the rain. Then a tidal wave hits me again. I'm nearly always blue for you, and always partial illusion of love. Dear, I fear I'm wasting time on love.
welcome to In Sickness and Health at the Coffee House. Tuberculosis or TB is an ancient disease, the scourge of our ancestors, and a bacteria that still lingers in a third of the world's population. Yet in the US, the rate is going down and has reached low enough levels that medical authorities have advised against testing low-risk children and adults for the disease. Unfortunately, that message has not been heard by lots of schools, doctors, and other medical professionals, and millions of people may be taking unnecessary TB screening tests. This not only is inconvenient and a waste of money, it can also cause anxiety and push tough drug treatment regimes on people whose test results give false positives. Here to talk about TB, our chances of catching it, and whether we should be tested at all, is Dr. Thomas Walsh, Medical Director of the Montgomery Health Department's Tuberculosis Control Program. Welcome, Dr. Walsh, to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
Now, TB is a ghastly disease. Perhaps you can just briefly describe how we know we've got it if we catch it and don't have a test for it.
Well, I mean, active tuberculosis has clinical manifestations in which the person is ill, and about 5 to 10% of the population who carries the tuberculosis germ will become ill sometime in their life. And when that happens, it's usually a respiratory illness associated with fevers and cough and weight loss, although it can present in other parts of the body, in the lymph glands about the neck, sometimes in bones, or in the even in the spinal column and in the brain. So it can be quite devastating and quite disabling.
But you'd feel pretty sick and presumably go to see a
Usually you
doctor.
feel pretty sick. Not everybody feels sick or is not aware of it. It's a very subtle illness when it starts, so you can have a phase where you may just feel a little tired and run down, and then begin to have the more obvious manifestations as it becomes more advanced. But many people just simply carry the latent infection, which, and that's estimated about 1/3 of the world population, or 2 billion people, carry the latent infection, which is a dormant bacteria, which may never cause trouble. And it's kind of unpredictable, although we do have certain risk factors we know that increase the likelihood it's going to show up.
So we may have it in its latent form now, and but never let it come out and actually cause an illness.
Right, and you're not aware of that.
Right.
Usually it doesn't cause symptoms in that stage.
Do you ever get rid of the TB bacteria once it's in your system, even with drugs? Is it always latent once you've caught it once?
The answer to that question is uncertain. We certainly know that if you give a preventive treatment for tuberculosis, that you vastly reduce the future development of cases in people who carry latent infection. And we feel that at least some of those, probably not all, have had the bacteria eliminated from their body. But there are some who have remaining bacteria, and the treatment doesn't always work, although it is highly successful most of the time. And the same thing goes for active cases. We feel we probably eliminate the bacteria from most patients, and we don't see recurrences, but we do have a tiny fraction who have recurrent problems over their lifetime.
Is that because of the superbugs that everyone's so scared of?
No, actually we've at the county level and the state level and nationally, we've had fairly good success with this drug-resistant tuberculosis, and most of the relapses we see locally are routine cases that we've treated quite aggressively and did well, and but the relapse rate is tiny. It's like 0.5%.
Didn't you say there are, earlier when we spoke, there's 17 different drugs used to treat tuberculosis? So there's quite a lot of ammunition.
There's 17 drugs we can use. A lot of them are almost what we call orphan drugs. They're not used for much of anything else, and they have a lot of toxicity. The drugs we primarily use are the best ones with the lowest toxicity, and there's basically 4 to 5 of those.
Okay. Now, why is TB going down in the U.S. when it's going up in so many other countries? It's what are the reasons for this?
Well, tuberculosis treatment became much more aggressive in the last 10 years. There was a problem with the resurgence in the 80s among people living in the United States, And this was due to the fact that many patients were diagnosed, were not put on proper treatment, or they started on proper treatment and then became lost to follow-up because public health clinics didn't have enough nurses, physicians to find the patients. And so people would stay intermittently sick and infect other people, and then they would become sick. So there was a rise. And then in the beginning of the early 90s, the public health infrastructure really got a jolt of an infusion of cash and expertise, and steps were taken to basically ensure that every patient that we could find successfully completed treatment. And we use a method called directly observed therapy most of the time, where we have a nurse or a caseworker watch the patient swallow their pills.
So without infected people wandering around, you're not going to have it spread that easily. In fact, it's not all that easily spread. You can't catch it from a cough in the metro.
No. The general threshold we think of is in terms of 8 hours of close face-to-face contact, usually in a small room, a room that 10 by 10. With an 8-foot ceiling, something like that. That would be the threshold where you might expect transmission to occur.
So spread amongst family members, perhaps the most factor.
Family members, having a family member with TB is a high risk factor for getting TB yourself.
Now, testing for TB goes on quite in blanket form. My own son was tested, a 2-year-old, before going into preschool. It was on the form that he should have this done. And he had a positive test result. So the family then was in a state of, oh my goodness, where did he possibly get TB from? He obviously didn't have the active case. We had an X-ray done. It was negative. All the family were tested. And I was advised to put him on a drug for 9 months, which wouldn't have been fun at all.
Right.
But there was no way that we could figure out how he could possibly have caught this. And so we stood our ground and had him retested, and it was negative. So a false positive. And we could have gone through the drug treatment, as was advised by many people. What's the chance, how often do false positives actually show themselves by turning negative?
Well, I would say that story, about half the people that I see who seem to be low risk for TB, if we simply do a repeat test, we oftentimes find it's negative. But even in ones where we do repeat test and it still shows a reaction, we feel that most of those are false positives because these are low risk individuals. And
now, what is low risk?
Low risk basically is being born in the United States in this era, when TB is dropping rapidly. The chance of being exposed is extremely low for the general public. We consider high risk healthcare workers like myself.
Okay, so healthcare workers.
Healthcare workers, persons born outside the United States from countries where there's lots of problems with tuberculosis because there are effective treatments, but they're not available. So people can remain infectious to others and contagious for 1, 2, 3 years before they succumb to the disease. It's not a rapidly progressive, fatal illness. It can linger for a number of years. And
someone, I suppose, in the family of somebody who has it.
Yeah. Anyone, if you have a family member who ever had tuberculosis, that's a risk factor because you may have caught it from them. Certain comorbid diseases tend to increase the risk that you may get sick with tuberculosis, and the biggest one, of course, worldwide is AIDS. But diseases in which you need to take medicines to suppress your immune system increase the risk factor that you might contract tuberculosis. In other words, the 8-hour exposure could be much less, and so you're more susceptible to catching it.
So if you don't have any of these factors, if you're just, a kid living in a regular neighborhood in Montgomery County, you should not have this test done at all. In fact, who is it who recommends, what are the medical authorities who actually say this should not be done and recommend against it?
Well, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the American Thoracic Society, the American Lung Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics,
say it shouldn't be done.
American Society of Infectious Disease, I mean, they all recommend not testing low-risk people. The problem is the test is a very old test. It has a lot of variability in interpretation. It involves feeling the skin, not just looking at it. So one person's positive, someone else is negative. It has subjective variability in interpretation. And a small fraction of people will react to the test because they're exposed to environmental bacteria that that are cousins, if you would, of tuberculosis.
Harmless bacteria that would...
Generally harmless bacteria. Occasionally we see disease due to these bacteria, but most of the time they're simply harmless environmental germs.
Okay, we're running out of time here, but I guess the message is that people should question whether or not they should go through with this test, because there are consequences of, 9 months of treatment is not fun for anybody, especially if it's not there in the first place. Okay, we've run out of time. A very big thank you to Dr. Thomas Walsh, Medical Director of Montgomery Health Department's TB Control Program. If your doctor orders TB screening, you might ask him or her to consult with Dr. Walsh before performing the procedure. I'm Kathy Christensen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
That's it for this time. See you next month in The Coffee House.
I'm principal of a new kind of public school. It's open up to 15 hours a day, year-round. It has loads of academic, cultural, and recreational activities. We have medical and dental services right here. Our teachers have more time to teach. Our students are better prepared to learn. There's just one problem. We can't get the kids to go home.
Find out how your public school can be more like this one. Call 1-877-LOVE-TO-LEARN.
$50 invested in a mutual fund 20 years ago returned $452. $50 in the United Negro College Fund returned an award-winning actor. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Every time an adult gives up on our kids, every time we surrender to the belief that their future is out of our hands, another child is left behind. I'm General Colin Powell, and I don't believe in giving up. That's why I'm asking you to join America's Promise. Log on to americaspromise.org or give us a call. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you can do something important. Pull your weight.